right, welcome back to Mystery Wire with George Knapp. George, good to see you.
Hey, Ron, how you doing?
Life is good. I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty busy.
Okay, no, it is sort of busy for you lately. We've got John Forrest and Carlos Sampson here. Forrest directing the show, and Sampson putting the show together and making it all happen here. I'm Ron Futrell. Glad to have you with us here. Oh, we're going to tackle, how about the mystery, the great mystery of all time? We do a lot of UFO talk and go through those issues, solve mysteries, look for mobsters. But this one, why are we here? You met one of the most interesting people in the interview that you did with him, Dr. Michael Pravica, Director of Physics at UNLV. Fascinating interview, and we're going to put the entire thing up on Mystery Wire, but this was what brought you two together to get together with him?
You know, in this UFO mystery and the pursuit of it, you end up reading a lot of things that maybe you wouldn't read otherwise in order to get an understanding of how maybe the universe works, what the forces are, to give you some idea about maybe are these visitors from other planets, other dimensions. And you have to read a lot of physics. Now, one reason people become journalists is so they can avoid math, and you have to read a lot of stuff that you wouldn't otherwise read to get your head around this. And this is about as big of a mystery as you can get. I read this article, I think it's been out about 2 years ago, that suggested that human consciousness originates in higher dimensions. Now, either of those two topics, higher dimensions and consciousness, you could spend your whole life reading about them and trying to get your head around them and wouldn't understand either. This guy, Dr. Michael Pravica, had written this article. I read it. I thought, wow, that is really an interesting take on two big mysteries and how they might explain where our visitors come from, where we're going, what is our role in the universe, what's our purpose here, why is there anything? A lot of really big questions that would, if you wake up at night and you start thinking about them, you're not going back to sleep. So I realized in reading this article, this physicist who wrote it, holy cow, he's from UNLV. He's a physicist at UNLV. And then I read his resume. He had got his PhD at Harvard. I think he had been at Caltech as well. This is a brilliant guy. I don't know how UNLV landed him, but he was writing about things that a lot of physicists would not tackle. And he supported it with facts. And I thought, I got to meet him. So we called him up. We set up a time for an interview. I went over there. I spent a couple hours with him and just blew my mind.
I like that he puts religion into this, too. And he declares himself right off the bat as being a man of religion, I believe Catholic, from what I listened to the interview. And here he talks about the simple question, why do we exist here? You asked him about that.
We only have 5 senses, and maybe for the lucky ones 6, and yet there's so much that goes on in this universe that we don't know, that are not detected by the senses, that it would get to a higher level of how did this universe come about to be, as it expands, what is it expanding into, where did energy come from? These are very natural questions that come starting with the sort of the foundation, the background of physics, but then actually transcend physics because it gets into a realm that we cannot measure, we cannot study yet.
A big question, for me anyway, why does it exist at all? Why is anything here?
Well, in my opinion, that's an excellent question, but the fact is, as far as I know, we are real. We do, whether or not we're in somebody's dream or something, that's another deeper question, but then that still relates to, well, who's dreaming? So the fact that we are here, that we are conscious, we have this concept of consciousness which transcends our universe, which transcends even some of our own thoughts, I believe is proof that there is something deeper than we even could imagine.
Okay, something deeper. He's hinting at God there. He's saying in a belief in God that there has to be a creator of all of this. Did you come away with that?
Yeah, for sure. And we got into specifics about it. I mean, that also takes a little bit of courage in scientific circles, especially for physicists, to go ahead and proclaim religious beliefs and think that it all kind of fits together, that somewhere on the cycle, the natural world and the spiritual world do fit together. And it allows him the freedom to entertain ideas about things like ghosts and UFOs and things of that sort. He mentions about our 5 senses. We humans evolved to be able to navigate our world. And these are the senses that we needed in order to survive as a species. But there are all kinds of other things that are going around us that we can't hear and we can't see. Microwaves, radio waves. You have a dog and a cat you know that they can see and hear things that we humans can't see. So, there are other things going on around us that we're unaware of as humans. And one thing that we really don't have our fingers on is consciousness itself. What is it that makes us us? A soul? He gets perilously close to saying souls are what we're talking about here.
No, and the levels of consciousness, he also got into that a little bit, what you just spoke to there. And you asked him about that, the different levels of consciousness.
Do you get a sense that there are layers or levels of consciousness, that there might be some universal consciousness and that we individually have our own little slice of it?
Well, I think that, again, the fact that we can imagine, we can think outside of the box. And so that's a gift that basically it's called like an Ansatz experiment. You can go outside of the box and sort of be an external observer and sort of create your own little world. That's a gift that transcends biology and I believe transcends this universe. The fact that we have mathematics that easily shows what higher dimensions are is part of that gift. And so I feel that it's all, I think that there may be different levels of consciousness. I was a guest on a show and somebody suggested that maybe animals have a lower level of consciousness, two-dimensional, sure. I mean, it's all possible. I just think that, like I like to tell my students, don't be limited by your intelligence, okay? That's a deep concept there. So the fact that we can transcend our intelligence, that we can imagine basically anything, I think means that we are connected to a much higher level consciousness than even we are aware of.
Okay, that gets more spiritual there as well. Talking about the level connected to this consciousness, that we're connected to God through our spirit, through our soul. And as a Christian, he said through the light of Christ, if you will, all of these things are important, and a lot of people believe in and feel.
Consciousness is tossed around in UFO circles these days. We think it's all related to consciousness. That's just a buzzword that nobody really seems to understand. Robert Bigelow, here in Las Vegas, he created BICS, the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, and has tried to gather all the best minds in the world to try to figure out what it is. Some people think it emanates from our brain. Dr. Pravica is not one of those. He thinks there's some sort of a universal consciousness in this universe. And as I said, that first paper I read, our individual slice of that consciousness comes from higher dimensions. Now, you could spend all day arguing about whether there are higher dimensions and people would have a hard time understanding it. But he says these are other realms and they could have other intelligences that come in and out or relate to us. You look at musicians, songwriters who will write a song and they swear they just pulled it right out of the air. Paul McCartney's talked about this. Tom Petty used to do it. It comes into their head from out of nowhere. It's already written, the whole thing, the melody, the words, everything. And artists who get the same inspiration, and writers who suddenly get a whole book or a movie or something like that downloaded to their head. They're tapping into something like a universal consciousness, an Akashic record, and just talking about it and thinking about it really stretches your brain to try to understand it.
Well, and the fact that we as humans are capable of doing this, no other species is. They have levels of consciousness that are different, certainly, but there is a reason for that, is what he feels. Artificial intelligence, fascinating to hear what he has to say about that. And I want to get your thoughts on that, because that is certainly the buzz phrase right now when we return to Mystery Wire. Welcome back to Mystery Wire with George Knapp. We are tackling one heck of a question here tonight, George. Yeah. Was this your idea? It sort of was, talking to Pravica, to get deep and talk about some of these.
And the challenge is, I have a multi-hour conversation about this heady stuff and trying to figure out how to put it into a 5-minute news story. That challenge is still ahead of me.
It's still, no, and you will meet that challenge, I'm sure. Okay, one of the things Dr. Michael Pravica, UNLV talked about was artificial intelligence and what its role is in the future. I found his thoughts here fascinating, and let's listen to what he has to say.
AI, big topic now,
Absolutely.
rightfully so. There's a lot of debate about whether it can become self-aware whether it can develop consciousness. What do you think?
Excellent question. I don't think it will. And because again, I think that what we have inside us that allows us to think outside of the box, to think of higher dimensions, is not of this physical universe. And so AI is created from neural networks. It's ones and zeros. It's not the same thing as even our own neural networks, which are pulses, and they may be different pulses depending on different stimuli. So I think AI is something that people are putting too much hope in. I think it's a tool, like the calculator is a tool, like a computer is a tool, but humans will always be able to think outside of that tool because they created that tool.
Okay, he's talking about our humanness there, the fact that we are human, that we have this soul, this spirit, depending on where you feel God is in Christianity. AI can never have that. We can give away parts of our humanness, if you will, by spending forever on our phones and having plant chips in us and things like that.
Right.
But it can never become human. Is that
Right.
what you got from that?
And I agree that it may not be conscious in the way that we are, but it could still take over. It could still become Skynet at some point, and if it doesn't need us anymore, we could be gone. I mean, I don't necessarily ascribe to that theory, but it's a scenario that's been described by really smart people. There are those who believe that AI is from somewhere else, that it travels from planet to planet and planetary systems, one planet at a time, sees some primitive species, helps it advance to the point where it develops its own AI, and then swoops on in. We got into discussing AI in the sense of, is this a simulated reality? A lot of folks think that maybe our lives are simulated because a lot of it seems scripted. It's hard to believe that a software program could create our lives and run it. But we humans are creating entire little mini universes ourselves. We're now at the point where we're almost to quantum computers and create our own simulations that go on forever. So I'm not sure that I would dismiss the simulated theory. And Ron, that some days feel more real than others, don't they?
Oh, no, I think you're absolutely right about that. Yes. More aware, more conscious, more in tune, more connected.
Yeah. I had mentioned before about BICS, the Bigelow organization, looking into consciousness studies. One of the things it focuses on is near-death experiences. So people die. They're in a horrible accident, and they're dead. They're physically dead. And it's measurable that they're gone. But they rise, their consciousness, their soul, call it what you want, rises out of the body and sees all that's going on, and then it comes back. There is no way that it should be able to know the things that happen while it's physically dead, 10, 15 minutes or more, but they do. And these are fascinating stories and accounts, well documented, and it suggests that there's a part of us that goes on, that is separate from our physical reality, that is in contact with a universal consciousness, call it a soul. It gets down to the bottom of what makes us us, and the scientists who think it's just generated by the brain can't really explain why people should still have consciousness when the brain is dead. And there's a lot of cases where that's true.
Well, and that would fit with his religious beliefs, Michael Pravica, with his religious beliefs, my religious beliefs, that stuff is possible. Harry Reid, you met with him quite often and talked about some of these issues, his religious beliefs, and the feeling that we are both a physical being and a spiritual being, that we have within us that spirit that lives on after this life. Can't be measured. You can't put it on a Geiger counter and see it go beep, 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 beep. But you have these stories.
There's a friend of mine, a co-author. We co-wrote a couple of books. His name is Dr. James Lakatsky, brilliant guy, engineer, who ran the world's largest, or at least the United States' largest UFO investigation, OSAP, that we've talked about before. His latest research, his latest writings, I'm not part of that, but he suggests UFOs are a tiny subsection of a much bigger mystery. And it's what we'd call paranormal stuff that's real. And the other things, Bigfoot, ghosts, UFOs, aliens, are all subsets of something much bigger. And until we understand the much bigger picture, we're not going to figure out the rest of those mysteries either. Okay,
and I love what he says here about Dr. Pravica, about the connection between humans that exists. That's real, that you can feel it, that it becomes a sixth sense, if you will, between people and humans when you have experiences. Here's his thoughts on that.
yeah, over millennia of existence, we've gained a little bit of knowledge, but we still have a long way to go. There's many phenomena that are not understood, and I just say, let's just keep studying them. Let's keep seeing if we can gain insights. There is certainly connectedness between human beings. I remember when my uncle passed away, and I didn't know it. He came to me in a dream, and the next morning I found out he had died. Nobody's going to tell me that wasn't weird, okay? Because I hadn't been in touch with that uncle for decades. So, the point is there is a connectivity. I believe it's accessed through hyperdimensionality, because then you don't need to worry about traveling at the speed of light and all these kinds of things we worry about in this universe. It's hard to investigate because it's metaphysics. How do you do experiments on ghosts? I know people are trying, and I salute their effort, but it's challenging. Or UFOs.
Okay, I've got a story here for a second that I want to tell, similar to what he's talking about with his uncle and his passing. And it was an experience I had. It was February 1st, '08. I remember the date. I was awakened by a voice that told me to do something. It was a nephew's voice of mine. I knew whose voice it was. I went and did it. Went to work that morning. I was doing morning news over at another TV station here in town. And so I normally wake up 3:30 in the morning. His voice woke me up at 3 a.m. Go on, do the show. My mom calls me about 6:30 in the morning. I'm on air. Tells me my nephew has passed. Okay? The voice that had woke me up that morning had passed hours before. Explain that to me. There's no explanation other than consciousness between humans. It still affects me to this day.
Yeah, I can tell. I can tell. It would. Of course it would. And there are reams of information, books filled with cases like that. The kind of research that I told you about that Bix has been doing, collecting and gathering the best research and the best thoughts from around the world. We don't know how to explain that. And it's very uncomfortable for scientists to talk about it. A lot of scientists proclaim that they're atheists. They don't believe in anything like that. There is no intelligent design. All this stuff just happened. Life grew from a combination of amino acids and microbes and things like that. And are uncomfortable with considering that there is some sense or order to the whole thing, that it sprang as part of a plan. Dr. Pravica is not one of those who's afraid to get into that. He embraced all of it. And if you believe there are higher dimensions and other intelligence is in those dimensions, and that our consciousness is connected to that over there, then pretty much anything can be possible.
No, and I will say this too. I've got a wife who is very sensitive towards these things. She seems more connected on so many levels than I am. As men, we seem to be a little more practical of just this is nonsense.
Yeah.
But she is that on a regular basis. We all have people that seem to have gifts. Some have the gifts of the spirit, I would say.
Talking to people like Dr. Pravica can keep you humble, by the way. And I've had the opportunity to meet some of these brilliant physicist guys and researchers, and like Hal Puthoff and Jacques Vallée and folks like who take on these topics like UFOs or paranormal events. And they do keep you humble in trying to keep up with them and make sure you can even ask questions of them. We don't know the answers to these big mysteries. It's fun. It's fun to pursue them. It's fun to try to get your head around it. And for a physicist of his brilliance to go ahead and say he embraces the spiritual part of it and doesn't think there's any conflict with physical laws and the spiritual beliefs and something like a soul, a version of consciousness, I guess, it takes courage, and I applaud him. And when we put these stories together that are coming, and when people see the entire interview we post on Mystery Wire, I think they're going to have a better understanding what the heck we're talking about.
Okay, quick break. Some final thoughts when we return. Okay, our conversation with Dr. Michael Pravica that George had recently. And I find it fascinating that with the UFO world and the religious world, that there's a coming together that wasn't there years past. And you've had to have seen that. The more religious people are willing to say, wait a second, there's other dimensions, there's other things out there happening we can't explain that are not there. And that's compatible with a belief in God. Am I right about that?
Yeah, one of the reasons that's been given for the cover-up is because, hey, if we tell the world about aliens, these are government people thinking this, if we tell the world that there are aliens here, they're going to freak out, especially religions. Oh my gosh, they'll go crazy. You know, that was one of the first topics I tackled when we started down this road years ago. I went to faith leaders here in Las Vegas, different faiths, and asked them the same question. How would your congregation, your spiritual beliefs, would they be compatible with the idea of aliens? And every single one of them said, yes, no problem. Basically, it's greater testimony to the glory of God, if that's what you believe in. And, you know, if there are souls out there, we want to save them. We want alien shekels in the collection plate. I don't know if it gets to that point. Harry Reid, the late Senator Harry Reid, and I had an ongoing conversation, private, for more than 30 years. And he was a deeply spiritual man, LDS guy. And it wasn't until probably 15 or 20 years into it that we started talking about how the idea of UFOs and visitors is compatible with his Mormon belief, because they think of other worlds. The other worlds theory is perfectly compatible with it.
It's taught as part of doctrine,
right,
that there are other worlds out there, worlds without number. And we are a small grain in a trillion beaches on this planet.
And it gets even more complicated when you realize that our universe may not be the only universe. A lot of quantum mechanics folks think that there are multiple universes, big bubbles in a much bigger reality that bump into each other. Not only other universes, but higher dimensions, as Dr. Pravica documents, and alternate realities. You get into questions about time, retrocausality, things that happen in the future, how it can affect the past. I mean, you know, this will wear your brain out, just having a 2-hour conversation with this guy. And we're going to be hearing a lot more of it.
And you will get to see the entire interview is going to be on Mr. Wire. I suggest you listen to it, because to me it's fascinating as somebody who is very comfortable with putting religion together with the aspect of unexplained things out there between humans. And if we lose our humanness, we've lost who we are, and that's something we need to protect.
It can take you down some real fun paths, too. Reincarnation. You know, some of the studies that are being done in connection with consciousness, these cases of little kids who remember past lives are really eerie when you get into them. The near-death experiences, where we go when our bodies are dead, physically dead, and then some people come back and they can remember what happened while they were out. You know, ghosts. Dr. Pravica mentions it very briefly there, but he doesn't see any problem with dead people, our dead people, the souls, whatever it is, existing somewhere else, some higher dimension, and occasionally reaching back to good old mom or dad.
No, that's I've had experiences. I could talk about that now for another hour, but we'll leave it at that for you. And thank you very much for listening and diving in down to this rabbit hole with us. And George, thank you for your thoughts, and Dr. Michael Pravica, and much more of Mystery Wire.
Full interview going on our website.
On our website, mysterywire.com, and 8 News Now, and you can also go to download the app on your TV set, on your smart TV, to be able to see these shows, a bunch of these shows. We've got them all out there, and you can enjoy Mystery Wire. You can jump down that rabbit hole all day long and just watch them over and over again if you'd like. So thanks for watching. Bye for now, everybody.